What up, y'all? This is Laney Sheppard.
This is Nate Aguinaga.
I'm Kim Torres.
And our topic today is about mental health in correctional facilities.
Come to find out, mentally ill offenders are usually kept in prisons or they're sent to hospitals. Usually when they are sent to hospitals, it's usually involuntary. However, a majority of inmates with mental issues have been institutionalized and kept serving terms in prisons. A quote by Watler, I think that's how you say it, from a book called From Asylum to Solitary. Since 1970, almost 90% of these psychiatric hospital beds have been closed, and the mentally ill are again being put into our prisons. So, as far as facilities where mentally ill inmates are headed to, it's usually they're basically stuck in prison, which is unfortunate, but
that was because of budget cuts, right?
Yes, yeah. And I was reading something where a majority of California inmates with mental issues are found being moved from their institutions and being put back in prisons.
You know, you would think that in California, like you would see more facilities wanting to do more stuff about like mental illness, but it's like the complete opposite, which is kind of funny to me.
I mean, if you also think like overcrowding, there's so many people in there, so many inmates, it's hard to kind of like figure out who goes where. It's too much to do. It's so much information in a facility. That's how I feel.
But if they wouldn't have shut down like these mental facilities, there wouldn't be like that much of an overcrowding problem.
That's true, yeah. So if we take it back to the quote that you talked about, I felt like it was very important. You mind reading it again?
Yeah, so a quote by Watchler from his academic journal, From the Asylum to Solitary. He says that since 1970, almost 90% of these psychiatric hospital beds have been closed, and the mentally ill are again being put into our prisons. Based on that, I think that we're going backwards from that quote. And this article was published in 2014, so it's fairly recent. Yes, it's 7 years ago, but this still seems to be the trend. And I think we should be putting more mentally ill inmates into specific institutions instead of putting them back in prisons. I just think we're going backwards.
I agree. Yeah. Once you put a mentally ill inside of a prison, I feel like they're not going to get better.
No, there's no going back after that.
Well, when you put them back in a prison, it just creates a whole nother problem. It's, like I said, it's going backwards. It's removing all the treatment that they were getting, and not necessarily all of it, because I'm sure I hope that rehabilitation has worked in those other institutions, but being put back into that environment can really harm what they were being taught at those other places.
Also, if we talk about how the inmates are treated, like how they go into the facilities and how they transition into what they need to be, like the treatment programs and stuff like that, it's actually very difficult to treat an individual if they go to the jail system, because the facility only has 48 hours to determine how they can be treated, and if they can't be treated, most likely they'll get put back into the system.
How do you know that it's 48 hours?
Usually when you go into a jail, they have a minimum of 48 hours up to a year sentencing. So a jail, you have 48 hours for sentencing, while prison you have over a year. So in prison you've got over a year of sentencing, which means they can implement more programs, whereas jail you have 48 hours to determine what type of treatment program they can do. And this is based off of what Taylor said, using protocols based on in the jail system and the prison system as well.
Yeah, I did hear that the jails are sometimes like not as good when it comes to like treating people with mental illness, and having them sent to prison and that is actually a better option for them, for as odd as that may sound.
Okay, so if I were to ask you a question, what type of percentage of inmates do you think lead towards that impact?
I'm just gonna guess like 40, 45-ish.
More than 50, but less than 70.
Based off this article, it's between 60 to 80%.
Oh, you're lying.
It's
we
a
were
very
way
high
off.
number.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was close.
But yeah, that's with drugs and alcohol problems.
Okay.
So are you kind of saying that they're all grouped together, like mentally ill inmates are kind of blended with people who are in for drug possession and
Yes,
drug
yeah.
abusiveness and all? Are they grouped?
Yeah,
Usually?
because usually they process, like, if someone took any type of drug, let's say cocaine, and they weren't acting themselves, they were hallucinating, that would be categorized into a mental health problem.
Right.
So that's how they would put, I guess, the statistics into this outcome of 60 to 80% of the offenders are charged with drug and alcohol abuse. And that's put into mental health.
When looking at the looking at the types of facilities, and this kind of goes hand in hand with what you were talking about, there's such thing as involuntary hospitalization. So just as those people with the drug problems were being grouped with other people with mental illnesses such as schizophrenia, they are involuntary being put into hospitals, just like they're involuntarily being grouped with others that don't really match with their distinct problem. Like, they don't really look at the individual problem, they look at the bigger problem, which could be good in certain senses, but involuntary hospitalization is huge, especially in today's day and age.
What does it take in order for somebody to be involuntarily, like, put into these type of hospitals? Because I know that when you're under the age of 18, technically you don't really have that right. You know, your parents kind of consent to that stuff. Yeah. But, you know, when you're over the age of 18, you kind of have, you know, your own free sense of will. Yeah. So my question is, like what would it take in order for someone to go into that extent that you have to get in, like, against your own will?
Well, we can go over, like, when you do the intake of an inmate. They start out with 3 types of steps. So in the same article I've been referencing, it talks about 3 types of steps. They have an acute program, which determines pretty much the background of an inmate. Once they figure out the background, then they can go into the subacute program, which pretty much determines what type of mental health they have, which could be a substance abuse. It could also be like dementia, any type of personality disorder. Once they figure out that, then they can go into the chronic stage, which will determine what type of treatment they need, where they need to be located, if they can go into a prison, if they have to go into a treatment facility. So those are the steps for the intake of an inmate.
Yeah, I also want to talk about how many of these inmates who have been rejected from, like, hospitals and mostly, like, you know, their own type of rehabilitation center are being treated when they actually go into these prisons. Because, you know, as many people know, when jail or prison isn't exactly the funnest place to be, so I can only imagine how draining it must be for these people who have mental illnesses to go into this type of environment and just be ridiculed with all these stereotypes, you know, and yeah.
Well, I mean, to bring it to an extreme extent, there have been many cases, thousands of cases, to show that some mentally ill prisoners have been put in solitary confinement.
Yeah.
Which is...
because they're on suicide watch, most of those.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that could be good in that sense, but at the same time, you can never know personally what they're going through.
Yeah.
And of course, if the agency or the jail agency finds that they're a threat to other prisoners and correctional staff, that may be a good idea to put them into solitary confinement. But if they're just putting them in there because either they think it's funny, or they're just messing with them, or they're just treating them,
or they're not
just
even
because they're
understanding.
different. Yeah, they're not even understanding. That's when it comes to a point where it's too much, and the research shows that many mentally ill inmates are better suited in more relaxed and and more sociable environments.
Okay. I know that, so I was watching this documentary earlier called Dealing with Mental Illness in Jail. It's by News Time Production. They basically talk about how some prisons have some kind of programs for their inmates. One that's called Mindfulness-Based Reduction Program, which basically helps inmates heal from their past trauma, those that suffer from PTSD, anxiety disorder, depression, and overall suicidal tendencies. So this mindfulness program is supposed to be like a meditation, like look deeper into yourself. They also have Tai Chi, which is, there's studies on it where it's supposed to reduce anxiety. And they found that actually incorporating Tai Chi into inmates' day-to-day routine actually reduces confrontations between the actual inmates. So there's less fights, there's less tension between, the people inside. So it's overall a good thing to have. Even for people who don't have mental illness, it's just a good stress reliever for those, in such environment.
Yeah, in like confined type of space. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I definitely thought she said chai tea at first.
Ooh, that sounds good right now.
On that note, we should take a break.
Welcome back. We have our chai teas. We are refreshed, and we are back to discuss more about this inmate situation. So I was reading this. Okay, I wasn't reading. I watched this documentary by Vice News. It's called Institutionalized Mental Health Behind Bars. So they had this really good example that I really wanted to share with you guys. So there's this inmate. His name is Pravion. Well, anyways.
Let's go with it.
I'm so sorry. He was previously a homeless man in Chicago, and you guys want to know what he did? What his big crime was?
What did he
Let's
do?
hear it.
He stole a pair of jeans.
A pair of jeans. A
A
homeless man
stole a pair of jeans,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I'm gonna guess like $25, like
Okay.
a $25
Sure.
pair of jeans, right? So he was sent to jail, and he actually suffers from bipolar disorder and depression. So
Okay.
he already has that on top of him. And like I said, he was homeless. He did add that he was living on a train. So, he has a mode of transportation. That's pretty cool of him. And he did use drugs to medicate himself. So when he was sent to jail, anybody want to guess how much his bail was set at? Like
maybe 100?
For a 25 pair of jeans. His bail, 100? Okay, what about you?
Yeah, can't be more than 100.
Really? Okay. It was,
Let's go.
15
Go ahead.
It was $150,000.
Thousands.
Thousands.
For a pair of jeans.
For a pair of jeans.
Well, also he did have drugs, but at the same time.
No. He didn't have drugs on him.
Oh.
That was his crime, stealing the pair of jeans.
Okay.
Yeah, and he, as of the documentary that I saw, he had been in there for 3 months. Nobody has told him anything. Just awaiting his trial.
He shouldn't have just been set in the jail and waited for trial. Like, he needs treatment right away. Maybe he even wants to be in jail for the treatment. I wonder why it was set. So
I wouldn't blame him, to be honest. I mean, if he's not getting treatment outside of, but he's in jail and he's getting the right kind of medication,
Yeah.
it's better than being on the street and being on
right.
the wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
I agree. Well, that was a great example. Well, that concludes our podcast. Thanks for joining, y'all. Once again, my name's Laney.
My name's Nate.
I'm Kimberly.
And thanks for joining.
We'll see you later.